Okay, so we're starting 3.1, the Articles of Confederation, and the objective for today is that you'll be able to describe the weaknesses under the Articles of Confederation by analyzing the powers that were granted under the Articles of Confederation. So just a little bit of a review. This is important, so you do want to write this down. We just finished talking about the Declaration of Independence in the Revolutionary War, and we are now becoming a new country. One of the major individuals during the fight for independence was Benjamin Franklin, who is pictured here in the bottom right-hand corner. And Benjamin Franklin was very focused on creating a union. And during the Declaration, or during the Revolution, he was trying to motivate colonists to join together, to come together in order to fight against Great Britain to become independent. And so you saw this poster over here to the upper right-hand corner, join or die. And what you'll notice is that the snake is cut up into individual pieces, and each individual piece has the name of a state on it. So South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and New England. And so these represents the colonies and how they were, if they don't come together and work together as one, then they will die. And I think this is really symbolic for the first few years of our new nation and how we struggled, because each one of these states really wanted to be independent. They were very fearful of having somebody control them. They were very fearful of getting into the same situation they were in with Great Britain. And so they really wanted their own individual independence. And so I think that this is very, very symbolic of foreshadowing what was meant to be the first few years as an independent nation. I also wanted to discuss a little bit about women in the New Republic and how their role shifted. So during the Revolutionary War, many women helped serve. Some of them fought, as you see up in the upper right-hand corner picture here. Some women were spies. Some women helped with the war effort in whatever way they could, but they were very much involved in the war effort. After the Revolutionary War ended, though, there was a shift on what they expected the women to do. So now they expected the women to be what we call a Republican motherhood. And this idea that they are expected to raise the next generation of patriots. So the women's role shifted very quickly during the Revolutionary War into this idea of the Republican motherhood and raising these new Americans. So what was the New Republic? What is the New Republic? Well, the New Republic was this new form of government that we wanted as an independent nation. As a nation, we were very fearful of a strong, powerful government like Great Britain. We were fearful that they would make decisions without representation. We were afraid of taxation. We were very fearful of them having too much power. However, the problem being is that the states weren't united. Like I said in the picture before, the states didn't work together. They all wanted their own individual independence, so that caused a problem. And we're creating a republic, and a republic means a government where citizens are ruled through their elected officials. So it was kind of understood that people wanted some sort of a republic. They wanted to have elected officials that helped to rule and govern them. It was just a debate over how much power they were going to give those elected officials. So the Second Continental Congress met, and when the Second Continental Congress met, they drafted or created what we know as the Articles of Confederation. And this was the first form of government underneath our new independent nation. The Articles of Confederation means an alliance. So again, it wasn't necessarily a united country. It was an alliance, saying that we are going to work together. Under this alliance, states had most of the power. So the federal government really had no power or very little power. The states were the ones that had most of the power. Each state had one vote, which was problematic because that meant large states had one vote, even though there was more people that they were representing, and small states had one vote, even though they were representing fewer people. In order to pass any law, you needed 9 out of the 13 states. So that's more than the majority. The federal government had no power to trade, so they could not trade with foreign powers. Now, the states could, individual states could trade, but as an entity, we could not, or the federal government couldn't trade. In addition to that, the federal government could not tax. So the federal government could not trade, the federal government could not tax. So therefore, there was no real way for the federal government to get money, which was really problematic if you're a federal government not to have any way to gain any money, because then you can't pay for things that a country should pay for, like a military. So one of the things about our country is people wanted to expand westward, right? So people wanted to be able to explore into these new areas and these new regions. And so the government saw this as an opportunity to make some money. They're like, great, we can figure out how to sell some of this land. We can make some money since we can't tax and since we can't trade. So they made 2 ordinances. The first was of 1785. And this was a way to survey the land. So this was a way to mark out the land, to figure out what land they could sell, what land they couldn't sell, how were they going to sell it. So that was the first part. So they would survey the land to sell it. The second was the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. This was 2 years later. So first they surveyed it, and then 2 years later, they divided the land into territories and developed a plan for how to admit new states. So as you can see, not long after they did that, we started to admit new states into the Union with Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and then finally Minnesota. The problem being is that even though they came up with this plan, they did not plan on what to do with the Native Americans or how to encounter or work with the Native Americans. Again, Americans seeing this land as their own and not considering the Native American perspective in any of this, which eventually led to conflict, which we will get into a little bit later. One of the first major problems, though, underneath the Articles of Confederation was what we called Shays Rebellion. So remember how I said the federal government really didn't have much money. So they didn't have much money for a military. So that was a little bit problematic. They were also trying to figure out ways to gain money. And so Daniel Shays was a farmer, and in 1786, he led a rebellion. The federal government was going to implement a tax hike. Many of the farmers were struggling. They didn't have the money to pay for the tax hike, so this was extremely problematic for most of them. So Daniel Shays organized a rebellion to rebel up against them. They rebelled up against them. Their mediocre at best military was sent out to stop the uprising, and they did so, but not very successfully. Eventually, it did break up, and Shay and his men ran off, but shots were fired, people were killed, and what ended up being the result of that was a huge embarrassment for our country, because the federal government couldn't even control its own people in a way that was effective and understand why the people were frustrated. So the effect of Daniel Shays Rebellion and why it was such a big deal is because it questioned the power of the federal government. It proved that the federal government really had no power, and that was problematic. And so eventually what it ended up leading to was the creation of the Constitution. After Shays Rebellion, the leaders of the country realized they needed to come back together, that the Articles of Confederation was not successful, and they needed to either redraft or to create something new. And so this shows us how the Articles of Confederation was not successful. And next lesson, we'll move on to discuss what happened underneath the Constitution to make things more successful.